Hello everyone. Welcome to Story Hub channel. Discover real stories of wife betrayals, shocking twists and turns and their secrets. Hit the subscribe button and get to our story. I might just be the first husband in the history of screwed up marriages to actually send a thank you card to his wife's lover. Yeah, you heard that right. And honestly, I really did. Normally I hardly ever get sick. But this time, a nasty flu strain was making its rounds at the office where I worked. One Tuesday morning I was feeling pretty miserable, coughing up a storm, so my boss, not wanting me to spread it around, decided to send me home. It was around noon, and I thought my wife, Emma, could take care of me. Get me some chicken soup, check my temperature, and fuss over me a bit before putting me to bed. As I turned onto our street and got closer to the house, I noticed a blue pickup truck parked in the driveway. At that moment, I didn't think much of it. I felt too lousy to care. The truck didn't look familiar, and since it was parked where I usually left my old sedan, I just pulled up to the curb instead. I went in through the garage, which leads into the kitchen. The kitchen was empty, and so was the front den. That's when I started feeling uneasy, not because of the flu, but something else. I walked toward the back of the house where our bedroom is, and that's when I heard those unmistakable sounds, the kind you hear when someone's having an affair. I quietly crept toward the door, which was slightly ajar, and took a peek inside. And sure enough, there was Emma with some tall, lanky guy I'd never seen before, and she looked like she was having the time of her life. My reaction was kind of strange. Part of me wanted to barge in and put a stop to their little party, but another part of me just felt numb. I should mention right now that I wasn't turned on by this. When you've loved someone, as long as I'd loved Emma, seeing them cheat on you is the last thing that would excite you. If you're a normal person, that is. And I've always taken fidelity seriously. In that moment, something clicked for me. A flash of clarity where I could suddenly see my future laid out in front of me. I made a decision right then and there that my life was going to change for the better. I pulled out my cell phone, pushed the door open, turned on the camera, and snapped about 4 good shots of the shocked pair. With solid proof of Emma's infidelity and her lover's involvement, I turned on my heel and walked out of the house the same way I'd come in. On my way through the garage, I grabbed a screwdriver and, without much thought, jabbed it into 2 of the tires on the jerk's truck, making sure to leave some big, nasty holes. I know it was petty, but it was the least I could do. Then I got into my car and drove off, but not before jotting down the license plate number of the pickup. It was the first day of the rest of my life. As I drove around aimlessly, I started processing what I'd just witnessed, and realized it had probably been going on for a while. I didn't know how long Emma had been cheating on me, whether this guy was the first or just another in a series. But the truth was, I didn't really care. I suppose I should give a bit of background at this point. My name is James Miller, and when this story took place, I was 40 years old and had been married to Emma for exactly half of that time. Once upon a time, we were deeply in love. It was almost like love at first sight. We met not long after I finished college and started working for a big tech company in a mid-sized city in the Midwest. I grew up in northern Colorado and had always hoped to find work closer to the mountains, where I used to camp every year as a kid. But Emma was from the city where we ended up spending our entire married life. I honestly can't pinpoint the exact moment when my marriage started to go downhill. It was a long, slow decline, something an outsider might not even notice, but I felt it deep down as things got closer to the end. We all have our dreams, and mine was to live up in the mountains and write the great American novel. I think Emma's big dream was simpler. She just wanted to marry someone and raise a family right there in her hometown. But you know how dreams usually turn out. They often crash and burn when they hit the hard rocks of reality. My reality ended up being that I was stuck in this bland Midwestern town, cranking out computer programs for the same company I started with right out of college. I climbed a bit on the corporate ladder, but eventually I got stuck while more ambitious folks passed me by. Part of my issue was that I refused to cut corners. I was a perfectionist when it came to my work, and I had no patience for people who took shortcuts. Another part of my problem was that I got so good at my specific job that the company saw me as indispensable right where I was. So, while I was passed over for promotions, I did get regular raises and the occasional bonus. But there was also the fact that I had a pretty passive personality, I was content to just go with the flow, and that attitude spilled over into my marriage as well. Now, don't get me wrong. Emma was an attractive woman with dark brown hair and a curvy figure, and I always loved her. She never quite lost all the weight she gained during the pregnancies with our 2 kids. But I still found her attractive. And apparently, so did someone else. We bought a house shortly after we got married. It was in a decent neighborhood, though certainly not the fancy Grant district. The house was built back in the 1970s, and a lot of things inside hadn't been updated since then. So we slowly replaced one appliance after another without any real plan. We were constantly fixing this or patching that. We always talked about buying something better, but after refinancing the mortgage to cover some loans a couple of times, we realized we'd priced ourselves out of the possibility of selling it. In other words, what we would have needed to pay off the loan and buy something better was more than the house was really worth. Sure, we could have sold it for less to someone looking for a fixer-upper, but that wouldn't have solved the problem of finding a better place that we could actually afford. And then there were the issues with our kids. 3 years into our marriage, we had a son, Brian. 4 years later, our daughter Jessica was born. These kids were the perfect examples of why some animals in the wild end up eating their young. I tried to be the disciplinarian as much as I could, but Emma's idea of discipline was to just give them whatever they wanted, and she never let me punish them for anything they did wrong. The consequences were pretty severe. Brian turned out lazy, disrespectful, and a total slob. Jessica was a bundle of nerves, a neurotic mess. They figured out early on how to play Emma and me against each other to get their way, and by the time they were teenagers, we had completely lost control of them. Brian was on the verge of losing his 6th minimum wage job since barely scraping through high school. It seems employers have this weird expectation that their workers should show up on time and not look like they just rolled out of bed. He was living in a rundown house in town with 3 of his slacker buddies, and I was pretty sure he was at least smoking pot and drinking a lot. Jessica was about to flunk out of high school altogether because she couldn't keep her headphones out of her ears long enough to pay attention in class. She was also dating some sketchy college guy covered in tattoos from his wrists to his shoulders. Emma was a nurse, and somewhere along the line in her career, she decided she preferred working the night shift. So, on the days she was scheduled to work, I'd get home around 5:30, we'd sometimes have dinner together, and then she'd head off to work around 6:15. Because of our conflicting schedules, we gradually spent less and less time together, and our relationship started to wither away. Sure, we'd make time for each other maybe once or twice a month, usually on a weekend afternoon when she wasn't working. It was okay. Nothing terrible, but it had become pretty routine. We'd strip down, fool around for a few minutes. I'd make sure she got what she needed, and then we'd just drift apart again. Every now and then, Emma would want me to show her some affection. Still, things were all right between us, until about a year before this incident, when she started becoming more difficult to deal with. She'd always been a bit moody, but I guess when midlife hit, it hit her like a ton of bricks. Before long, she was coming up with excuses to avoid intimacy, at least with me. Sometimes it was a headache, sometimes she was just too tired, or she'd head to bed way before I was ready, and on it went. She was also constantly finding fault with something I did or didn't do. Looking back now, the signs were all there, but I just didn't see them. There were times I'd call the house during the day when I knew she should be up and about, but no one would answer. Occasionally, she'd stop for drinks with some of her co-workers at an all-night bar that catered to the night shift crowd. A few times she'd come home on weekends after working and immediately start a load of laundry, like she was trying to wash something before I could notice. Everything pointed to Emma's infidelity, but like I said, it really didn't matter. So, let's recap. I was stuck in a dead-end job in a town that was going nowhere. I was living in an overpriced, run-down house. My love life was non-existent. My difficult wife was cheating on me, and my kids were turning into delinquents. What would you do? Probably exactly what I did. The very first thing I did was head over to the walk-in clinic to get checked out for my flu. I got a steroid shot and a prescription for antibiotics. Feeling a bit better, I went to the local superstore to get my prescription filled and pick up a few things I'd need. Toiletries, a hot plate, a small pot, some soup, and sodas. Then I drove clear across town and got myself a motel room. I'd stopped by the bank on my way to the store and withdrew some cash to cover the cost of staying somewhere for a couple of days. Once I was settled in, I sat down and wrote out a plan for the next few days while I heated up a can of soup. I ate as much as I could manage, put the rest in the mini fridge, crawled into bed, and crashed. It was dark when I woke up, and for a moment, I was a bit disoriented until I remembered where I was and why I was there. I was still weak from the flu, and really out of it. It took me 2 days, between being sick and the shock of seeing Emma like that, to really process what had happened. I warmed up the leftover soup, drank a soda, watched a football game on TV, and then went back to bed. I did check my cell phone and saw a dozen missed calls from Emma. I smiled grimly at that. Let her stew, I thought. The next morning I woke up feeling quite a bit better. The first thing I did was call the office to let them know I wouldn't be coming into work. My boss's secretary picked up the phone, and after I explained why I was calling, she mentioned that Emma had been calling all afternoon trying to find me. She did, huh? I replied. If she calls again today, and I'm sure she will, just tell her I've called in sick and won't be in. That should at least get her off your back. James, where are you? She asked. Let me put it this way and see if you can figure it out, I said. I'm not at home, okay? Then I hung up. I thought I'd made it pretty clear that I no longer considered that place my home. I'd thought long and hard about my next steps, and the more I considered them, the more they made sense to me. Honestly, I couldn't even be angry at Emma. It was pretty clear she didn't want to be married to me anymore. For whatever reason, she was after something I couldn't provide, whatever that might be, and I wasn't about to stand in her way. If she wanted to be with other men, fine. I'd give her the freedom to do that, and, in turn, free myself as well. But there was still some unfinished business. There were going to be consequences for both Emma and her lover. Nothing too severe, but consequences all the same. The first thing I did was call the motor vehicle department, pretending that I was interested in buying a pickup truck but had lost the owner's phone number. All I had was the license plate number, along with the make, model, and color of the truck. The friendly woman on the other end of the line cheerfully provided me with the man's name and address. My next move was to contact a lawyer friend of mine and ask for the name of the best divorce attorney in town. As it turned out, I got in touch with a highly recommended attorney, Sarah Kent, and scheduled an appointment for 10 that morning. I took a quick shower, then headed down to the lobby for a light breakfast, before making my way to the bank. I had 2 certificates of deposit that I'd bought several years earlier. I cashed those in, withdrew half of the money from our joint savings account, and took half of what little was in our checking account. Most of the money went into a new checking account I opened in my name only, along with a bank debit card. I still walked out with a little over $5,000 in traveler's checks. The next few minutes were spent calling credit card companies to cancel all but one of my cards and have the accounts put solely in my name. I also paid off the balances on each of those cards. The one I generously left for Emma? I didn't bother paying it. Let her deal with that. Next, I went to a branch of the public library and bought some computer time. I transferred the 4 images I'd taken on my cell phone to an email address I had and printed out 2 copies of each one. I have to admit, they were very clear and explicit. Then I looked up information on the guy who'd been with my wife that day, a man named Tom Lawson. I found out he was married, so I jotted down his wife's name. I attached a copy of the pictures with a note explaining how she could reach me for more information, and put them in an envelope addressed to her. Afterward, I went to the post office, bought some stamps, and mailed it off. Then it was time for my appointment with Sarah Kent, the attorney. I laid out what I'd done and what my plans were, and she simply nodded. When I showed her the pictures, though, her first response was one of caution. "Divorce seems like a pretty drastic step on such short notice," she said. "Are you sure you don't want to try and work things out?" "What's there to work out?" I replied. "My wife has a lover, and I'm not interested in standing in the way of true love. I've got places I want to go, things I want to do with my life, and staying here with a cheating wife isn't part of that plan." In the end, I agreed to a legal separation for 90 days. The divorce papers were drawn up, and if after 3 months I was still set on ending the marriage, then the papers would be filed, and Emma would be served. "Now, if you go ahead with the divorce, what kind of settlement are you looking for?" Sarah asked. "I've already taken half of the liquid cash from our bank accounts," I said. "She's got a 403(b) from her job. She can keep that, but she won't be getting any of my 401k either. She can have the house. The mortgage is in her name anyway, and I don't want it. But if she sells it, I want half of all proceeds from the sale. All right, Mr. Miller, that seems to cover everything, Sarah said. I'll look forward to hearing from you in about 3 months. My last stop for the day was at the office, but not to work. I headed straight to the Human Resources Department to inquire about taking early retirement. After 22 years with the company, I had built up a decent retirement fund. They told me I could start drawing on my retirement pension when I turned 60, which was still 18 years away. I frowned at that, but perked up when I asked about cashing in my 401k. The HR lady strongly advised against it because of the hefty tax penalties I'd face. Still, if I chose to, I could cash out immediately and walk away with around $70,000. I thanked her and headed back to my motel. I was exhausted, and after whipping up another pot of chicken soup, I crashed for nearly 7 hours. When I woke up, it was after midnight, and I knew I was about to face the hardest part of my plan, going back to the house to collect my things. Emma was supposed to be at work, but I wasn't sure if she'd actually gone in. As it turned out, she hadn't. She was sound asleep when I quietly slipped into the house, which was completely silent. Apparently, Brian was so worried about where I was that he went out like he always did on Friday night. I wondered if the kids would even notice when I was gone. Probably not. The first thing I did was gather what I needed from the garage: tools, camping gear, and other useful stuff. I went into the little office area, grabbed my laptop, plugged it in, downloaded some files from the home PC onto it, then carried it to my vehicle. I had a couple of boxes with me, which I filled with CDs, a portable player, a bunch of books, and some mementos that meant something to me, though none of Emma. After loading that up in my vehicle, I grabbed some suitcases and quietly walked into my former bedroom. I was about halfway through packing when I heard a small gasp behind me. Then I heard Emma's voice. "James, where have you been?" she asked. "I've been worried sick about you." "Have you now?" I said, trying to keep my anger in check. "What are you doing?" Emma asked. "What's it look like I'm doing?" I replied, my tone dripping with sarcasm. "Packing," Emma said, her voice trembling. "Give the lady a gold star for observation," I said. "James, I'm so sorry," she started. "Emma, I don't want to hear your excuses or your apologies," I cut her off. "It really doesn't matter why or how or even who, though I do know who. You want to love someone else? Fine. I'm giving you the freedom to do that." "But I don't love him," she began. "I love you. I don't want him. I want you." "Could have fooled me," I said in a bitter tone. "Sure sounded like you wanted him pretty badly yesterday afternoon. Let me see if I can remember the exact words. Oh God, screw me. Wasn't that it?" Emma buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. I looked at her with a level gaze. Whatever brief flash of anger I had was gone, replaced by apathy. No, not apathy. More like disdain. Maybe a bit of disgust? Sure. But mostly, I realized that the strongest thing I was feeling was emptiness. I realized in that moment that I didn't have any feelings for her at all. I just didn't care anymore. I finished packing while she cried into her pillow. It wasn't until I started out the bedroom door with the suitcases that she jumped off the bed and tried to stop me. "Wait," Emma cried. "Don't leave me, James, please. Can't we work this out? Please, I'm sorry. It was nothing, just a mistake." I just looked at her silently as I carefully disentangled myself from her desperate grip and walked toward the front of the house. Emma followed me, sobbing uncontrollably. I pointed out the notice of legal separation that was sitting on the kitchen table, right among the dirty remains of that night's pizza dinner. "I'll be back in 3 months, early December," I said. "If I'm still feeling the same way then as I do now, I'm going through with the divorce. I'll let you know generally where I am, but for now I'm leaving, and I'm not sure yet where I'm going to be. Goodbye, Emma. I'll see you around." "James, no!" Emma cried as I walked out the front door with my suitcases. I didn't look back as I climbed into my vehicle and drove across town to my motel room. The next day was Saturday, so I slept in. When I finally got up and going, I packed up what little I had in the motel room and checked out. At $85 a night, the motel was a bit pricey, so I found a place near my office that catered to visiting business people. They offered long-term rates that were much cheaper than the average motel. For about $45 a night, I rented a clean room for 2 weeks that had a nice little kitchenette, internet, cable access, and a large TV with pay-per-view movies if I felt like it. I did sample the movies on TV, but mostly I kicked back and indulged in football all weekend, doing absolutely nothing else. Then came Monday morning, and I went to work. The first thing I did was walk into my boss's office and hand him my letter of resignation, effective in 2 weeks. Needless to say, the whole office was shocked. I'd been there so long, in the same position, that I guess I'd become part of the furniture. My boss, in particular, was in a panic. He spent the entire 2 weeks trying to talk me out of retiring, but I was firm in my decision. On Tuesday of that first week, I got a call from my daughter. It was an eye-opening conversation. "Daddy, why are you leaving us?" Jessica asked. "You'll have to ask your mother that," I replied. "She said to ask you," Jessica said. "All right," I said. Friday afternoon, I caught her with another man. I was sick with the flu, left work early, and there she was. I've got the pictures to prove it. "Wow," Jessica said. "I didn't think she had it in her." "Well, that explains why she's been so weepy. Daddy, she's a mess. Just sitting around crying and beating herself up. You know she called in sick all 3 days this weekend?" "Look, tell your mother to pull herself together," I said through gritted teeth. "If she thinks she can guilt-trip me into coming back to her, she's dead wrong. I've already put in for my retirement, and a week from Saturday I'm out of here. After that, what she does, what you do, and what your brother does are none of my concern." "Well, I love you too, Dad," Jessica cried. "Hey, you never cared about me before. Why start now?" I said. "You're just scared the gravy train's about to leave the station." "That's not true," Jessica said, her voice a bit unsure. I need you. You're the only one in this house with any sense, and I don't know what's going to happen without you." "Oh, I'm sure you'll manage," I said. "Look, Jessica, I'm sorry for what I said. That was mean of me. I'll be in touch, and I'll be home for Christmas, okay? I love you, really." "I know, Daddy," Jessica said with a sniffle. "I love you too." Michael never did call. Those 2 weeks were pretty hectic. Emma tried calling countless times, but after I hung up on her a few times, she got the hint that I wasn't interested in talking. Some of her friends from work tried to convince me to at least see her, but I refused, and I wasn't exactly polite about it. Turns out Tom Lawson was a nurse up in the same unit where Emma worked, and they'd been seeing each other for about 6 months. Most people I talked to thought he was the only one she'd been with, but no one knew for sure. I made it clear to all of them how much I appreciated them letting me know what my wife had been up to behind my back. After that, they didn't have much to say. In the middle of the first week, I got a call from Tom Lawson's wife. Apparently Emma wasn't the first person, married or otherwise, that he'd messed around with. But Emma was going to be the last, at least while he was still married to her, because I'd finally given her the solid proof she needed to kick him out. Funny thing, though, I never heard from Tom. Neither about Emma nor about his ruined tires. I had a lot to wrap up before leaving work for good. I had to train someone who could manage my job until they found a full-time replacement. I had to get my 10-year-old car serviced. I needed to find a broker who could set up my 401k in a private account, and I had to work with HR on my severance pay and cashing in my remaining sick days. Most of my downtime was spent watching TV, messing around on my laptop, or shopping for things I'd need once I left town. I also visited a few friends, all of whom were shocked that Emma would cheat on me. Before I knew it, the second Friday had arrived, my last day of work, and with it came a small sense of regret. I'd put in 22 years at that company, and had made a lot of friends there. At lunch that day, my boss called our department together, and they threw a little retirement party for me. That's when I finally lost my composure. I was trying to say a few words of thanks when I suddenly broke down and cried. The first time I'd cried over anything in years. I wept, not only because I was leaving, but also because of the circumstances that had led me to the decision to retire. I'd kept myself so busy over the past 2 weeks that I hadn't allowed myself to really process Emma's betrayal. and seeing my colleagues gathered in my honor just pushed me over the edge. But I recovered quickly, especially when Anna Cooper came over and invited me to an after-work get-together with a few folks at a local bar. Naturally, I said yes, though I made it clear that I don't drink. Anna was a fellow computer geek, but she was also a very attractive one. She was in her early 30s, a tall blonde, divorced, with a 10-year-old daughter who was spending the weekend with her dad. And as she mentioned that, she gave me a rather sultry look. I'll admit, it threw me off a bit. I mean, I'm not bad-looking. In fact, I look younger than my years. But I've never considered myself much of a ladies' man, or at least I didn't think I was. I'm a bit shorter than average, about 5'9". I wear glasses, have a bit of a belly, and while I'm not out of shape, I'm no gym enthusiast either. But I was about to discover that I had more appeal than I ever realized. There were 7 of us, 3 women and 2 men besides Anna and myself, and for once in my life, I was the center of attention. We sat around for hours, them drinking beer while I sipped on tea, sharing stories about the plant, the town, and each other. Amid the fun, we took a break for dinner. As the evening wore on, I found myself sitting next to Anna, and it became pretty clear that she was flirting with me. She sat close, touching my thigh or my arm now and then. I couldn't quite tell if she was just tipsy or if she really meant it. Finally, around 9 p.m, people began heading out. I wanted to get an early start the next day, so I got up to leave. Then I looked at Anna and realized she probably shouldn't drive herself home, so I offered her a ride. After receiving hugs and handshakes wishing me well, I walked Anna out to my vehicle. Once we were inside, she scooted close to me, put her hand on my thigh, and gave me a smoldering look. "I'm not really that drunk," Anna said. "I just wanted you to give me a ride, and not home either." "So, where do you want me to take you?" I asked, playing dumb on purpose. "Take me to your motel," she said. Then she pulled my face toward hers and kissed me hard and deep. "Anna, you don't have to do this," I said when we broke apart. "I mean, yeah, I'm lonely, but I don't want any sympathy." "Sympathy's got nothing to do with it," she replied. "James, I've had a crush on you ever since I started working here, and now I've finally got a chance. I'm not letting it slip by." "You've had a crush on me?" I said, surprised. "Come on, Anna, look at me. I'm a middle-aged, gray-haired guy. First off, you're not old. Second, your gray hair makes you look distinguished. Third, you're very handsome. And fourth, you're one of the nicest men I know. You're one of the few guys in that building who's never hit on me, or any of the other women for that matter. Trust me, we've noticed. You've always been a gentleman." "I've always been a gentleman," I echoed with a hint of bitterness. "Look, you're heading out tomorrow, and you deserve some TLC before you go," Anna said. "So, are you going to take me back to your motel and spend some time with me or not?" I laughed then and started up my vehicle. The truth is, I'd had plenty of fantasies about Anna Cooper, but I always thought she was out of my league. Besides, I was a married man who believed in fidelity. Technically, I still was married, but with the legal separation in place, I knew in my heart that my marriage was over. Anna Cooper was offering me her company, and I'd be damned if I was going to pass it up. The moment the door to my room closed, we were all over each other, kissing passionately, our hands exploring each other's bodies. In no time, I was admiring Anna's slender figure as she leaned back on the bed. We spent the evening talking, sharing stories, and enjoying each other's company. It was different, though. Anna was far more enthusiastic and engaged than Emma had ever been with me. We held each other, working together to find mutual pleasure. I could see the enjoyment on Anna's face. I collapsed onto the bed and watched as she sat up. Then she softly said, "Thanks." "Emma would never let me do that," I replied. She thought it was demeaning. "I can understand why some women might feel that way," Anna said, "but personally, I love it." We lay back on the bed, resting. We spent the rest of the night talking and connecting on a deeper level. Eventually, we fell asleep together. We woke up to the pale light of dawn filtering through the drapes, then got up, showered, and dressed. Anna helped me pack, and then I checked out and drove her back to where her car was parked. Before she left, she gave me a gentle kiss and stared into my eyes. "James, all I can say is your wife's a fool," Anna said. She doesn't realize what she's thrown away. Well, I suppose sometimes you just get too comfortable and fall into a rut, I said. I probably let things slide too much from my side. You know how it goes. Yeah, I guess I do, Anna replied. James, I hope you find what you're looking for, but if you ever decide to come back here for a while, look me up. I guarantee I'll treat you a hell of a lot better than Emma did. Thanks, Anna, I said. I'll stay in touch. You never know what might happen. Take care, okay? You too, she said. And be careful. With that, I was off. I got on the interstate, headed west, and didn't look back. I was setting out on my own, ready to travel the country with no plans, no itinerary, no agenda. There were places out west I wanted to see, things I wanted to do, but I had no specific schedule. I would go wherever the road took me. It was something I'd dreamed of doing for years but had never been able to. There was always the issue of money, family, or work. Now, nothing was holding me back. My first stop, though, was my old hometown. I wanted to spend a few days with my folks, who were getting on in years, and catch up with some old friends. I ended up reconnecting with someone I hadn't expected, and it turned out to be a delightful surprise. My parents were disappointed to hear that Emma and I were splitting up, but my mom wasn't exactly shocked. She just didn't seem very happy the last few times you visited, Mom said. The following Monday, I was at the supermarket picking up supplies for my trip when I heard someone call my name. I turned around, and a big smile crossed my face as I recognized an old friend. It was Donna Matthews, a classmate from school. She was a year behind me, but we always seemed to have a class or two together each year, and we became good friends. Back then, Donna was popular and a bit too outgoing for my taste, but time had mellowed her. She'd learned the hard way that the fast life wasn't always the good life. But time had also been kind to her. If anything, she looked even better than she did in high school. Her features softened by age, with a touch of grace added to her demeanor. She was a little shorter than average, with thick dark hair and expressive brown eyes. After divorcing her second husband, she'd moved back to town and was working as an assistant manager at the store. She lived alone in a small house in a quiet neighborhood, not far from her daughter's family. We chatted for a few minutes, catching up on each other's lives. When I mentioned that I was divorcing my wife, her eyes lit up. "I'm off tomorrow," she said in an inviting tone. "How would you like to have dinner with me?" "I'd love to," I said. "Any place in mind?" "How about my place?" she suggested. "It's been a while since I cooked dinner for a friend." The next evening, I arrived at Donna's place around 7 hours to find her dressed casually but attractively, her makeup tastefully done. We stepped into her small but cozy house and soon sat down to enjoy a homemade meal. I quickly discovered that Donna was an excellent cook, but I also learned that she was a skilled conversationalist. While waiting for dinner to finish cooking, we sat close together in her living room, catching up on each other's lives. She was very understanding about what had happened to me, but also about what had happened with Emma. Donna had been through her share of heartbreaks and was able to offer insights from both sides of the fence. It didn't make me feel better about it, but it did help. Dinner was something special: enchiladas, rice, and the best flan I've ever tasted in my life. "How do you stay so slim when you cook like this?" I asked, leaning back to give my full belly some room. "Oh, I only cook like this on special occasions," Donna said with a laugh. "If I ate like this every day, I'd be as wide as I am tall." We moved to the living room then and sat close together on the couch again. We talked for a while, and eventually, the conversation turned to why she had invited me over that night. "Because I wanted to do something I never got the chance to do back in high school," she said. "You were always so nice, so cute, so kind, but I knew I couldn't have you then. Times were different, and I had my own issues to deal with." "But you don't have that problem now, do you?" I said, leaning in close to her. We kissed then, and I lost myself in her soft lips and the warmth of her embrace. Donna responded like someone who hadn't felt this kind of connection in a long time, which made the moment all the more meaningful. After a while, we relaxed and started sharing stories from our pasts. We laughed about old times and reflected on where life had taken us. It was a cathartic experience for both of us, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was truly connecting with someone on a deep, meaningful level. In that moment, I found myself thinking about how I owed Tom Lawson a thank you for setting everything in motion that had led me to this point. Because of Tom and his affair with Emma, I was free from a comfortable but boring life in a dead-end town. I was free from an increasingly loveless marriage, a chaotic family life in a deteriorating house. I was free from a job that had long since stopped challenging me in a large corporation, where I was just another face in the crowd. Now, I was free to go anywhere, do anything, and connect with anyone I wanted. And I couldn't have done that with a clear conscience if I hadn't caught my wife and her lover in the act. After taking a breather from our conversation, Donna and I continued enjoying each other's company. It was the first of what I hoped would be many nights like this. We spent the next day together, catching up on lost time before I set out in earnest the following day. As I drove, I reflected that it had been exactly 3 weeks since I caught Emma and Tom, 3 weeks that had completely changed my life. This trip was the first step in living my new life. Over the next few months, I wandered the western half of the country, visiting places I had only read about before. My first stop was Mount Rushmore. Then I spent a couple of days exploring the site of the Battle of Little Big Horn. I walked the grounds, communed with the ghosts of history, and enjoyed the freedom that came with being on my own. After that, I drove to Jackson Hole and camped out for a week while I toured Yellowstone and the Grand Tetons. It was incredibly liberating to be out in the open, far from the pressures of my former life. From there, I headed up to northern Idaho, spending time camping on the banks of a beautiful lake. I'd been there once before, as a teenager during a Boy Scout jamboree. While there, I fished the lake and hiked the trails, relishing the cool mountain air of the northern Rockies. But when I woke up one morning in late October to find 3 inches of snow on the ground, I knew it was time to move on to warmer climates. I traveled to Seattle, then made my way down the Pacific coast through Oregon, spending some time in the wine country. And yes, I did sample some of the excellent wines the area is known for before heading to Yosemite for several days. After that, I visited an aging aunt and uncle in the Los Angeles area. My uncle helped me fulfill a long-held dream of seeing Southern Cal play UCLA in one of the great rivalries of college football at one of the most historic stadiums in the country. I also spent a day at the beach, taking in all the beautiful scenery. While browsing in a gift shop across the street from the beach, I spotted a postcard and got the wicked idea of sending one to Emma and her lover. It showed a scenic view of the coastline with the caption, "Greetings from the West Coast." I wrote a note on each one, thanking them for screwing around on me so I could take this trip, and then I sent one to the house for Emma and one to the hospital for Tom. That was the weekend before Thanksgiving, and it was time for me to head to where I really wanted to go. My best friend from high school lived in a beautiful mountain town not far from the Four Corners. He and his wife had started a small business and needed someone to help with computer marketing and other online work. It was a perfect fit for me. He owned a small house that he'd been using as a rental property where I could stay, and he offered a flexible work schedule that would give me the freedom to go wherever I wanted, whenever I wanted. I had spent a lot of my spare time on the road writing, and I had the makings of a pretty good book. I was writing about myself, my journey, and the reasons behind it, along with other reflections. Once I finished my business with Emma and settled into Colorado, I'd have time to polish my work. The book was all about the changes in a middle-aged life brought on by one disastrous event. I didn't know it that Monday when I headed east toward Colorado, but my life was about to change again in a completely unexpected way. I had been in Durango for a couple of days when Chris, my friend Kyle's wife, mentioned that she had invited a friend of hers to join us for Thanksgiving dinner. This woman lived alone, Chris said, and didn't socialize much, but Chris hated the thought of someone being alone on Thanksgiving, so she extended the invitation, and it had been accepted. It's funny how life can pivot on little decisions like that. Maybe I would have met Maureen O'Brien eventually once I moved to Durango, but who knows what might have happened in the meantime. Perhaps she would have decided to move on, or maybe someone else would have swept her off her feet. I don't know. All I do know is that when Maureen walked through the door of Kyle and Chris's house, my stomach did a little flip, and by the end of the day, I was determined to make her mine. Maureen was a woman in her mid-30s, quite tall at nearly 6 feet, and slender but not too thin. She had a pale complexion speckled with freckles, flaming red hair cut very short, and soft green eyes that were an enchanting mix of mischief and sadness. When she spoke, Her voice was like a melody of warmth and kindness. Yes, she was a full-blooded native of Ireland, who had come to the States with an Irish dance troupe, one of those river dance groups, and had settled in Denver. She moved to Durango about a year earlier after breaking off an engagement just 2 days before the wedding. It seems she had caught her fiancé at his bachelor party in the act of making a mistake. She hadn't intended to crash his party, but she and a couple of her girlfriends were on their way to breakfast after their hen party when they happened to pass a strip club and saw her fiancé, GC, and his group coming out. One of the girls from the club was wrapped around her betrothed, so she decided to follow them to see what would happen. It turned out to be an emotionally scarring event, one more blow in a life that had seen plenty of them. Her father had been an alcoholic who beat her mother until they fled him when Maren was 15, after he had started beating on her as well. Even then, she said, her father stalked them relentlessly until the police finally stepped in, and he was charged and convicted of spousal abuse. Later, she was assaulted while on holiday in London at 22, and she had her heart broken several times after that, culminating in her fiancé GC's betrayal. I think the reason Maren and I hit it off so well was that we both knew what betrayal felt like. During my weeks of traveling, I'd spent a lot of time thinking about Emma and what she'd done. I couldn't reconcile her claims of love for me with the image of her in bed with another man. She had betrayed me and our marriage, and I was left in the dark as to why. I kept telling myself that I didn't care. But deep down, that wasn't entirely true. I did care. I wanted to understand what had happened to the love we once shared, why Emma had felt justified in taking a lover on the side, knowing how much fidelity meant to me. I stayed in touch with what was happening back home, mostly through emails with Jessica, who seemed to have decided at this late stage to repair our relationship. She was clearly worried about Michael, who had indeed lost his job and was now pleading with Emma to let him move back in. I spoke to Emma a couple of times, briefly, but whenever she started to get emotional or tried to apologize, I cut her off. I did promise that I would sit down and listen to her when I got back. It wasn't going to change anything, but I wanted to hear her side. Nothing was going to change my mind. By that point, I had made up my mind about what I wanted, and I wanted to live in Durango. So I spent 3 weeks getting settled in my new home, helping Kyle and Chris with their business, and spending a lot of time with Maren. We talked long and deeply on Thanksgiving night, much to Chris's amazement and delight. When I walked Maren out to her car, we looked at each other and kissed. It wasn't a passionate kiss, but it held a lot of promise. Over the 3 weeks before I returned home, or rather, to my soon-to-be former home, we went on about a dozen dates and grew more and more intimate. I knew I had to be careful because of Maureen's past. She had been hurt badly before, and she was cautious about being hurt again. But the more I got to know her, the more I realized that despite her history, she was a woman with a deep and genuine nature. She was warm, caring, and had a sense of humor and a joy for life that was contagious. Waiting was excruciating because the more time I spent with Maureen, the more I wanted to be with her. She was so kind, so thoughtful, and yes, so vulnerable. But I understood her need to be cautious, and I respected her desire to take things slow. My patience was rewarded the weekend before I was scheduled to head back to finish things with Emma. Kyle and Chris wanted me to get a real taste of Colorado, so they planned a 4-day ski trip. There's a nice ski resort right outside Durango, and Purgatory is close by, but they wanted me to experience the full ski adventure. They pulled some strings with a friend in real estate, who helped us get a great 2-bedroom condo in Telluride, about 70 miles away. I was having dinner with Maureen one night a few days before we were supposed to leave when the trip came up, and she asked what she should pack. I just stared at her, and she gave me a knowing smile. "You knew I was going, didn't you?" she said. "I was hoping, but I wasn't sure if it was my place to invite you," I said. "You know the condo only has 2 bedrooms?" "And that's a problem, how?" she said, smiling a little wider. "Are you sure?" I asked, taking her hands and looking deep into her eyes. "Very sure," she said. "I knew you were the one I've been looking for all my life the first time I met you. I know you follow your heart. You're a good man, James, and you deserve to be happy." She definitely did. We drove up to Telluride on a cold, clear Thursday morning. The early winter snows had been heavy in the high country, so we expected good skiing, and we weren't disappointed. I had been skiing once before, long ago, when a group of us from college spent a week at Vale. Moren had only been once before, the previous season, with Kyle and Chris. Given our limited experience, Moren and I decided to take the one-day ski school that was recommended before we tackled the slopes on our own. After learning the basics, we had an absolute blast going up and down the mountain. We wisely stayed away from the black slopes, the expert trails, but we did try a few of the blue trails, the intermediate slopes, and found we could handle them with a fair bit of skill. It was exhilarating to spend time on the mountain with someone I was growing to care about deeply. I wasn't sure yet if it was love or if she felt the same way, but we certainly liked each other a lot, and we were comfortable in each other's company. We ended that first day sore and tired, but it was the good kind of soreness and pleasant tiredness that comes from having a great time. The four of us ended up at a nice, modestly priced restaurant for dinner, where we toasted our rapidly growing friendship in every sense of the word. When we got back to the condo, I showered and then settled onto the large bed with a book I'd been reading, while Moren took a long bath. I toyed with the idea of joining her but decided not to be too forward. I wanted her to make the first move. I'm glad I did. She came into the bedroom smelling like flowers, wrapped in a long, comfortable robe. She stood just inside the door and smiled at me. Slowly, she untied the sash of the robe and let it fall open. "See anything you like?" she asked, her soft Irish brogue sounding ever so sweet. I just nodded, admiring Morin's tall, graceful figure. My God, she was beautiful, with a warm smile and a gentle demeanor that put me completely at ease. I rolled off the bed and walked up to her, letting my hands gently caress her arms as we came together and kissed slowly, with a tenderness that was steadily growing. It felt like we were in a world of our own as I softly slid my hands over her shoulders while she pulled me closer. We walked to the bed and lay back, our bodies close and our hearts even closer. We spent the evening talking and connecting on a deeper level, sharing our hopes and dreams, and basking in the warmth of each other's company. It was a night I would never forget. The whole trip went like that. We tried nearly every non-black slope on the mountain, explored the shops and cafes of downtown Telluride, and spent each evening enjoying each other's company. By the time we returned to Durango, we knew this was more than just a passing connection. On the Tuesday before Christmas, I packed my vehicle with a few suitcases and presents for everyone, then headed back east for a few weeks. I stopped by my folks' house but didn't linger. I did visit Donna to give her a gift, but I told her I had found someone in Colorado I wanted to be with, and she smiled, saying she understood. "I wouldn't have expected anything less from you," she said. Anna Cooper reacted similarly when I got back to town and called her up for dinner. "I knew it wouldn't take long for someone to find you," she said. "You're too good a man to stay single for long. I'm glad you're happy." I didn't stay at the house when I went back. It wasn't home anymore. And I didn't want to give Emma any false hopes. I did visit quite a bit, and it was cordial enough, but we both avoided the elephant in the room until after Christmas. Surprisingly, it wasn't a bad Christmas. Michael had managed to convince Emma to let him move back home, but she finally found the backbone to lay down some ground rules. He could stay, but he had to pull his weight around the house. He had come dangerously close to serious trouble while living with his buddies, and apparently, it had scared some sense into him, because he was now talking seriously about entering a rehab program. Jessica had taken my departure as a real wake-up call. She ditched the sketchy boyfriend and was taking more interest in school, finally realizing, as I had repeatedly told her in our emails, that without at least a high school diploma, her chances of getting anywhere in life were slim. She even got a part-time job at a youth-oriented novelty shop in the mall, where her quirky style and personality were appreciated. That left Emma. The day after Christmas, when Jessica was at work, I gave Michael some money and told him to go have fun at the mall. Emma and I had serious business to discuss, and we needed to be alone. I brought the divorce petition that Sarah Kent had prepared and set it on the coffee table in the living room. Emma just stared at it, her sad eyes filling with tears. "I guess you've made your decision," she said. "I have," I replied, "but I think I deserve some answers first." Why did you cheat on me, Emma? I know we had problems in our marriage, but if you'd been open about them, maybe we could have worked through them. I don't know. I guess I expected you to fight for me, fight for our marriage. I thought that if there was someone else vying for my attention, you'd do whatever it took. But it just went too far. I was confused, but that's no excuse. I let it happen, thinking I could have this little escape, get that thrill out of my system. I never thought you'd give up on us so easily. Emma, what was there to fight for? I asked gently. You were unhappy all the time. Michael was one step away from disaster. Jessica was heading down a bad path. The house was falling apart. Work was draining. And then you started seeing someone else. Honestly, what was there to fight for? And that still doesn't explain why you chose to betray me and keep it going for months. That's something I just can't wrap my head around. A new experience, Emma said. It was a rush of excitement in a dull life, I guess. I just needed something more. But James, you have to believe me. I never stopped loving you. You were always the most important person in my life, and you always will be. I don't doubt that, I said. Though it's hard to believe you loved me when you were with Tom, especially when you were finding excuses to avoid being with me. Maybe I was the number one person in your life, like you say, but you were still giving a lot of attention to someone else. I'm so sorry about all of that, she whispered. I guess I lost sight of what really mattered. So do you hate me? No, of course not, I said. We had 20 years together, and many of them were good years. You're the mother of my children, bless their hearts, and I think deep down you're a decent person who got lost and made a costly mistake. No, I don't hate you, Emma, but I don't love you anymore. That ended the day I walked in on you and Tom. Maybe we just drifted apart and Tom saw an opportunity. In fact, I owe you thanks. What you did gave me the push I needed to start a new life, doing things I've always wanted to do, in places I've always wanted to be. Well, it's definitely agreed with you, she said after a moment. You look great. You do deserve to be happy, I guess. And I guess I deserve to be unhappy, don't I? She said as I watched Emma finally lose her composure. I didn't want to, but I went to her then and held her one last time, letting her cry. After she calmed down, she signed the divorce agreement. And since we were in a no-fault state and divorcing on the grounds of irreconcilable differences, it would be final in 60 days. I stayed a couple more days to pack up the rest of my things and to spend some time with the kids. I was still concerned about Michael, but it looked like Jessica was going to be all right. She had found her niche in retail sales and seemed to have developed a newfound respect for me. On the next to last day of the year, I said my final goodbyes and headed off to settle in Durango for good. That was a couple of years ago. In that time, Kyle's business really started to take off, and I found the variety of tasks I was asked to perform quite stimulating. I spent a lot of time polishing up my book, and when I felt it was ready, I began shopping it around to publishers. Rising Again received some nice reviews and even made the lower end of some bestseller lists. It's now on its third printing and continues to sell modestly. I'm currently working on a second book, a novel about redemption, and I have a computer full of essays and reflections that I may or may not ever publish. It doesn't really matter. I'm expressing my creative side in ways I never did before. Maureen and I fell deeper in love, and several months after we met, we were married in a small ceremony in Durango. Jessica came out for the wedding, and she and Maureen became close. Jessica was promoted to manager of the store where she'd been working, and she seems to be doing well. Michael's journey has been more challenging, and he's currently receiving help for his issues. We've stayed friends, and we still talk occasionally, mostly about how to support Michael. His struggles have been difficult, but we're hopeful that he'll find his way. Some people say betrayal is a devastating thing, that it can destroy lives. And in one sense, I suppose that's true. It certainly destroyed my old life. But from the bitter ashes of that betrayal, a new, far better life emerged for me. I'm living the life I always dreamed of when I was growing up, in a place where I always wanted to be. That would never have happened if I had stayed married to Emma. She did me a favor when she made her mistake, and as a result, I was liberated to follow my own path. The best revenge is living well, and I'm living a pretty damn good life thanks to my ex-wife and her decisions. Thanks, guys. I needed that. I needed